All right, so very good morning to you, those of you who are out of Uganda. It is a very dark afternoon here. It's actually drizzling. It's going to rain very heavily in a few. But I'm glad to have you, lady and gentlemen, Milton and Allimadi. It's a good pleasure having you once again. Sir, it's a pleasure having you on this show. Miriam, it's always a pleasure. Dr. Kamunyu, we're glad to have you for the first time here on our Uganda Diaspora show on Civic Space TV. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, those of you who want to follow up on more of the conversations we have, go to social media platforms, and that is on Twitter, Civic Space TV Uganda, Facebook, the same, YouTube, and the others. You'll find us there. So today's topic is a very interesting one. It has been going on for days, I think almost a year now, since the hashtag Stop ECOP started. And this, of course, started a long time ago when we discovered oil, and then the need for us to have an oil pipeline that is going to transfer our fossil fuels and all that. So a few days ago, if we could all remember, if we saw the news, the European Union passed a resolution condemning ongoing investment in fossil fuels in Uganda. The basis for the censure to most of us remains unclear. It seems to have its own connotations, but we'll get into that. Now, the Lake Albert Development Project consists of several partners, with the French multinational oil company Total Energies as the main investor, together with the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, the Uganda National Oil Company, and the Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation. They are jointly involved in the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, which is the ECO project, which was launched on February the 1st this year, and is planned to be complete by 2025. And hopefully by 2025, we can see our first oil come out of the ground. There's a lot that has been going on. People are against this pipeline for many, many reasons, but we also understand that it is one of the most important developments in Uganda, and we ought to either appreciate it or deal with it, because I don't see any other way out as me. But I'm glad to have you, gentlemen. First of all, I want to pick your minds on, we have reached here. We have reached at a point where we have just a few years to our first oil, and already we have protests against this move. I want to begin with you, Dr. Kamunyu. Why should we pay attention to hashtag, or is it Stop ECOP? This is our baby. We need to be very excited about our baby. Why is everybody against ECOP? Milton, please, go on.
For many reasons. Number one, the steward of the state is the wrong person. The dictator should not be given such tremendous potential financial power. So that to me would be the number one consideration. This is not an African country producing oil for the first time. We have had the advantage of hindsight and viewing how an African country with the wrong stewards can do with this potential resource. And that example is Nigeria. Nigeria, in many phases of its post-colonial history, has had dictatorial regimes very similar to the one we have in Uganda. It has outright military regimes very similar to the one we had in Uganda. We have been able to observe the history of how billions of dollars were stolen from the national treasury in Nigeria. We've been able to see how the revenue from the petroleum industry has caused the entire agricultural industry to collapse in Nigeria, because it became the very easy source of revenue. You just pump it out of the ground, you sell it to the international market, and you pocket the money. And in the case of Nigeria, it was literally pocketing the money, either the president or the military dictator and his cohorts. Nigeria started producing oil before Norway. Nigeria's National Wealth Sovereign Fund, I think it's something like maybe $5 billion, something ridiculous like that. The National Endowment, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, is $1.1 trillion with a T. Every Norwegian citizen has about $250,000 from this saving. 250,000. Compare how Norway has handled its funds from the oil surplus compared to Nigeria. Nigeria is the kind of outcome we would have given the dictatorial regime we have in Uganda. If we had a democratic government like South Africa, like Botswana, like Namibia, I would say, yes, we will be able to manage the oil industry and the oil resources properly. So that's number one consideration. Number two consideration, which is just as important, the world is trending toward clean energy. The world is trending towards electric vehicles. The United States, which is the major consumer of energy from the world, because of everybody here drives, everybody looks forward to the age where they can get the first license in this country. It's almost like a passage of right. Is the major consumer of energy. The major consumer of energy in the world is now setting deadlines. In fact, some states are now mandating that by a certain year, they should go essentially on electric vehicles, meaning they will be using mostly electric vehicles in this country in the coming decades. So Uganda, for many reasons, is coming on the market with oil at the wrong time. There are also regulations since the Paris Agreement of 2015. It was negotiated in 2015 and signed in 2016 about emission standards. And if you look at the resolution of the EU Parliament, one of the things they also said is that according to the International Energy Agency, if we are to maintain the increase in global warming by 1.5 degrees centigrade, then it means all new oil projects should be halted. And then, of course, it underlined many of the environmental ecosystem destructions that this project would create if it is undertaken. And in fact, the most serious recommendation comes toward the very end of this resolution, where it tells Total to, number one, suspend the process for at least a year, and during this time, explore alternative routes other than the one which is currently now from Uganda to Tanga in Tanzania, number one. Number two, it also says explore alternative projects which could actually be more clean energy oriented. So these are the concerns I expressed in the beginning about the political aspect. Those are my concerns, but it seems like it overlaps with their concerns as well, because as you notice, the title of this resolution emphasized human rights. And even though it said Tanzania as well, it says joint motion for a resolution on violations of human rights in Uganda and Tanzania linked to investments in fossil fuels projects. If you read it carefully, most of the examples, actually all the examples are from Uganda in terms of human rights violations. So that is my response to your question.
All right, Milton, thank you. Dr. Kamunyu, a very good afternoon. At least finally you've unmuted. We are looking at the European Union Commission, the European Union resolution, but also looking at why we are sabotaging, allowing to sabotage our own development. Does the EU's decision have any implications on ECOP, on Uganda's and the oil and Uganda's oil sector?
Good afternoon. A lot of issues have oil project in you. Told that it would be out. As a citizen of this country, I feel a lot of issues have surrounded this oil project, and a lot of words have been said that could indicate in one or another that this project is likely to end up the way I possibly begin to think. Because we expected the first oil drop to come out by 2018. That's what we were told politically here at home. We waited 2020, we didn't get anything. Now we are being told it could be by 2025, only if this deal comes out. And so far, we see that this deal also is being put to hold for a year to explore two important issues. One to do with environment and the other to do with human rights. And so, yes, this project has had a lot of issues that I think as citizens we need to reflect about. Because for any nation state to develop, her people must be properly mobilized, support projects of national significance. And so the words that have surrounded this opposition and government are indicative of a situation where there is a likelihood that people may not support this project. And so I'm not surprised that a group together with environmental activists and human rights activists go out there, because we seem to be divided in terms of how we embrace this project as citizens of Uganda. A group in power is saying this is our oil, or individual is saying this is my oil. The president, he may be joking, but a president's word is serious. And another group maybe feels this oil could bring us trouble. And so let's see how we can stop it, because we already have enough. And of course, the history of electioneering and human rights abuses here and there, and the images coming out of our various civic processes are not attractive to probably those who may be on the opposing side. According to me, I looking at what, for example, environmental activists are saying, that this oil pipeline has potential to undermine the climate, the efforts against climate change, and that over 100,000 people could be affected directly by or indirectly by this pipeline. And the fact that on the human rights side, compensations and displacements are likely, and also the fact that the government having money in its pocket more than it has now, and yet it has a history of being violent to its opposing groups, would be a disaster. I think points to yet another very serious issue that requires a national dialogue here at home. And so I can't logically say that, yes, we are undermining our own development. There are real issues that I think government and the opposing groups can work through. We've had some politicians talk of a national dialogue, and possibly some of these national development projects could come on board. And also, by the way, in my own view, probably this 20 trillion lost in corruption per year, which was reported by the Independent, and of course based on the Attorney General's report, the Auditor General's reports, I beg your pardon, and the 11 trillion, of course, that was reported by the New Vision, which to me is a loss between $3 billion to $5 billion, could be in itself enough money. if we looked at home here, just only fighting corruption and subduing corruption would free some money for us actually to invest in such projects on our own if we wanted, and maybe not looking up north. But maybe because we are signatories to very serious climate change conventions and signatories to very serious human rights conventions, I think, and based on the fact that there are issues, real issues here at home to dialogue on, I wouldn't conclusively say that anyone here is sabotaging home development or not. But I think political forces need to move here at home to establish an environment for citizens and making sure that citizens themselves realize that together they have a common destiny and that together they have a lot to do. And that when they do together, they benefit together. Otherwise, this project is a wonderful project. It could get us a few jobs, much needed jobs. I'm told we are more likely to lose 150,000 jobs if we delay this project. But I also would think that it's very important for us to look at these agreements also, because it seems that these the funders and Total in particular takes a lion's share here. And so reasonably, I think there's a lot around this project, and the opaque nature of some activities that go on in this project, and also other means, because I mean, I keep hearing advocacy groups talking about this opaqueness. Is also much to look into, and it joins with all these other factors, these major ones, including human rights. So I think for a project that is as important as this one, we must remain open for citizens to support it. I submit.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kamunyu, for that. Now, Miriam, everybody is pointing to ECOP, and now seemingly Ugandans are claiming to have their eyes open wide by this resolution, but also the hashtag Stop ECOP has been running. Is this not an affront to the nation's sovereignty? Are we not? Is this not fostering economic racism, neocolonialism, to mention but a few, imperialism at that, double standards from the EU, and of course, as much as the EU and the rest of the West seem to have our interests at heart, this is them against the UN Charter that provides for Uganda and Tanzania's right to self-determination and sovereignty over its natural resources, most importantly.
Yeah, among the rights in UN charters that Uganda is signatory of, there is also one which talks about human rights and freedoms. So when EU is pronouncing itself on this resolution, it's pointing out all those issues. Uganda is a sovereign state now, but it's also part of the global economy. It's part of the universal world. So the EU are our partners as humans and as development partners, in the sense that even the oil project, the ECOP, is partly owned by Europe. Maybe more partly, because more than 60%, and it's believed even the percentage is going higher, because Tanzania is about to divest part of its 15% shares. So the sharing of ECOP project shares, Total EP, which is a French company, has 60% shares. Uganda has 15, and Tanzania has 15. But Tanzania is planning to sell 10% of its shares ECOP and SINOC. Oh, there is also SINOC, which has 8% among the, so I mixed up the shares. So, but Tanzania's share, that smaller percentage that Tanzania owns, it's also planning to, again, sell part of it to SINOC and Total. So Total is going to be the huge shareholder of this project. So ideally, we can say this is a European project in Uganda and Tanzanian soil. So when the EU Parliament is pronouncing itself on this project, they are speaking for their shareholders, because Total EP is a public-owned company and it's owned mostly by Europeans. So it's, ideally speaking, as European Union, which is also a stakeholder in global politics, but also partly as a voice for its share, part of its shareholders, because Total EP is owned by Europeans, most of that the stocks of that company. So back to Uganda. This is not the first time that EU is pronouncing itself on Ugandan issues. On 2020, 2021, EU Parliament pronounced itself on Ugandan abuse of human rights during the elections, the violence, the election malpractices. So we are not surprised that they are again interested in Uganda. This is a country which recently had the gross human rights record that was attracting international attention. And then we did nothing about it, which is so sad. So like Milton said, we are, Europe is looking at this gross violator of human rights about to be handed a big check, which would empower the abusers to abuse more Ugandans. So we could say that this is more of, I mean, there are environmental issues raised, yes, and most of them are valid, but those are mitigatable. The biggest issue here is the governance. Who is going to manage this project? What type of government are we handing over this check? And how are Ugandans going to benefit? How is this project going to benefit Ugandans when we are, like Dr. Kamunyu said, we are the biggest embezzlers of government resources? Who is going to use this money? Who is going to receive this money? Is this money going to be put into proper use? So all these things are being put into considerations. And if you can say that most of the people advocating for Stop ECOP are mostly human rights defenders, and the issues being raised, the environmental issues, yes, they are very loud and they are not even answered for, but the biggest issue, and which comes even out more loudly in this European resolution, is the human rights violations, the governance issue. And that is fixable. Can we fix our managers and then we are handed over the check? Simple.
Very good.
Okay, interesting. Deal with our managers and then we get the check. But I realize this is us making, choosing governance over development. We as a country totally and absolutely need a development to move forward. Let us not stock poverty. Let us not, because with this pipeline, it is bound, not only the pipeline, the entire oil project, Uganda oil project, oil and gas project, is aimed at transforming our lives as a country, economically, most importantly. Now, when we sabotage our own projects, developmental projects for that matter, in the name of governance, for how long are we going to dwell on that? We need to move on as a country. We're in the 21st century. We need to up our game and, be part of the rest of the world. Milton.
General Museveni is the one who is sabotaging the country. If we had a democratic system, we would not be having this conversation today. So in fact, he's the enemy of Uganda and Uganda's development. He's the enemy of this oil pipeline. If he was not in his autocratic regime, the EU would not be having such a resolution focusing on human rights abuses. Perhaps we would not even be needing this oil pipeline as Dr. Kamunyu has pointed out, if we could control the $3 billion that being stolen, that's quite a lot of money. And to be honest with you, this protest by dictatorship in Uganda about issues of sovereignty and all that is complete, utter nonsense. It's just plain politics. How many African countries, after all, enjoy their sovereignty? Most of it is on paper. If your government is supported by the World Bank and the IMF, that applies to most African countries, actually. Countries uniquely that have more or less enjoying their sovereignty are countries like Botswana, and not by accident. Botswana has been able to manage its diamond industry very efficiently, transforming Botswana from a low-income country at the time of independence to a country that now has a per capita, one of the highest per capita incomes on the African continent. And I agree totally with what Miriam just said. Why should we give more resources to a regime that has clearly demonstrated that it is not able to manage the resources properly? We don't have really an opportunity to contribute other ideas to how resources should be managed in Uganda, because the dictator is the absolute person in charge of all the decisions in Uganda. So now you're going to add this check, as Miriam says, add this check on the table for the dictatorship. Ugandans are aware of this. Uganda, many of them are saying it directly, but they know that if we have, then perhaps there would be more support of this project. Look at Nigeria. I think Nigeria should be the king, this issue. In fact, if you're going to talk about imperialism and colonialism, I think Miriam just gave us the clear outline. The project is not even owned by Uganda, so one could actually say this is a neo-colonial imperial project being supported by the dictator of Uganda, imposed upon the people of Uganda. If we are to ever have this oil under control, we would need to have the kind of arrangement that Libya had. Libya was unique in that the Libyan National Oil Company actually owned the project as well. And the majority of the surplus from the oil go to Libya. That is why Libya was able to have one of the highest per capita incomes on the African continent. In fact, almost rivaling some of the lower income European countries, because it had total control of its oil resources. And that essentially is why Gaddafi was also removed by NATO and the United States. They don't care about human rights violations in Libya. If they cared about human in Africa, General Museveni. Excuse me, I think you're muted. Lynn, you're muted.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Thank you, Milton, for that. Now, I want to pick, of course, Dr. Kamunyu's mind. Recently, according to Uganda Oil, National Oil, I beg your pardon, it is Uganda National Oil Company. The process, especially for ECOP, was audited by third-party independent experts of the financing entities, and they found that everything was done according to the book, and even better. So it is so unthinkable for a country to say that 4 members of parliament took a trip, and I'm quoting, to Uganda, walked around and talked to a few people. We could not even validate project affected persons and sponsor the resolution to stop a project on which we have spent close to $4 million US, for which many of our businesses are recovering from COVID by getting contracts on which our tax planning is structured, I beg your pardon, on which our hands for the future is structured. It is simply unthinkable, and we cannot even think about it. Now, I'm quoting Peter Mulisa, who is the Chief Legal and Corporate Affairs at, of course, Uganda National Oil Company, Dr. Kamunyu. We have everything in place according to Uganda National Oil Company that oversees most of these agreements, most of these necessities for the oil and gas project to go forward. And they're saying everything was done according to order. Everything is according to the book, and even better. But here we are still poking holes at everything.
Thank you very much. I just like I told you, it seems this project has been halted by an external force, an external. It's a European Parliament. We don't have representatives there or anything. But and maybe it's because the company involved in this is a European company. It has a home in Europe. And I'm aware this is a territory that is very concerned and serious about the environment. It's at the forefront of campaigns to reduce the impacts of several projects, reduce emissions, carbon emissions, all over the world. And you also know that they have an upper hand. They are the biggest aid-giving countries. Of course, they are former colonial masters. They took a share of ours. But the truth is that for now, they have an upper hand. So I am imagining that the environmental issue is more of a scapegoat. Though serious, when they were talking about 100,000 people affected, the effects of climate, these could be mitigated. I am very sure these could be mitigated. And I think this is where the national oil company, all the bond in place, and that all the audits are in compliance with what is set out. And I can believe them, because if these are also involving Total, which I know operates within a very serious environment, or is concerned globally, or is a point of concern globally, then I can believe the national oil company on this. But maybe the audit for these other groups could be on the human rights audit. I do not know whether there were human rights audits and that the books are also clear there. This is why I agree with the Miriam, that this could be more to do with human rights. And human rights are to do with the governance system. And I do believe, as human beings, we can score on this. After all, we, as the NRM, we promised the full democratization of our country. We promised everything that we can possibly give on the front of freedom and human rights. So Miriam could be right that maybe the human rights issue is where we lack an audit report. And this is where I'm saying that these groups, being citizens of this country and all being a matter of improving our citizenship, because the returns on a country will also be returns on the citizens. I think to me it's possible that the groups or the activists on this matter of human rights, together with government, could see and agree, and then I imagine these activists also saw an area where they can easily twist government. And so they have also worked hard to make sure that on this point, they score a way forward. And so this is where I think government could also up its game. After all, this issue of democracy, the opposing groups or the activists or whoever they are, human rights activists, to score, to have a comprehensive audit on that and also a way forward on that. And then within 1 year, I think the project can stand. The project is for the citizens of Uganda. And I don't see the reason why we should hassle on this. It's not anyone's project. It's a project for the citizens of Uganda. And if Ugandans are saying, let's work together, let's talk over this. If some Ugandans feel they are not fully involved in this project, I think, to me, it would be a reasonable reason to say for them to sit and carry out this audit. This part of the audit, the environmental audit, is tick. Now the human rights audit could be embarked on, and then we have this project up and running. As an idea person, I think we cannot lose our sight of freedom. It is not good for us to even undermine that core, because it's a core of humanity, self-determination. And I don't see why we should not. We can sit, agree to move forward. And if we think there's a lot to lose, then the citizens of Uganda should also worry, because I don't think they are asking for someone's house. They're asking for a dialogue on this human rights issue. But though they are not coming out clearly, I see in the presentation we seem to hear more of environmental issues. And no one is clearly giving us this objection and its details on human rights. But if it comes out, I am sure the NRM government in power is also capable of sitting down with groups like they have done before, and they carry out this audit, and then the national oil company will move forward. Once again, I say oil is for Ugandans. It's not for individuals or for a group, and government is not an animal. They are citizens of Uganda. And so I don't see what is difficult here. I also don't even want to over-politicize colonialism, imperialism. What's wrong with sitting, Ugandans sitting, and they evaluate how they are self-governing? And then if it's a condition and we defeat the person who is, I don't think they are saying, no, democratize the parliament. And I know they are saying, okay, Ugandans, sit and look into the issues of dignity of your people, and the fact that all people wish to self-determine finally. And then we agree, and once we do that, we defeat whoever. But these calls of, I find them very dishonest personally, that we are up there looking for money. Yes, we could have our colonial past and all the sentiments, but these guys are saying, no, first sit together and agree, and then we fail on that assignment. How can we fail on that assignment? That Ugandans are sitting to agree on how to develop themselves, and if you want money from anyone, usually even banks, they usually ask you to do the audits of every kind, including to assure them of your capacity to pay back or to honor your monthly or yearly payments. And so in this, I think European Union is saying, no, look, our company is involved with you. We want you to sit down as citizens and you agree on, and then that will assure us of the, because if citizens are also, I'm also thinking that if you have such a project in this region and citizens are not happy, you risk your investment. They could destroy this pipeline. You won't have armed forces, along it for years and years. You need people to buy into it, to love it, to see it as a national project, to see it as their project, our project, to assure it. Because I don't think we will assure it with money. There's no insurance company that will. It's the people of Uganda, people of Tanzania that will assure this project and love it and protect it and guard it. And so to sit and agree to me is also reasonable. So the national oil company should sit and also carry out this audit. And then we get our project running quickly. Why not?
Right. Thank you, Dr. Kamunyu. Now, Miriam, according to Dr. Kamunyu, what the EU is proposing is that we pause for 1 year and find alternative routes, find alternative resources, but this is halting the entire project. This is putting, we have already invested over $4 million into this project, and so when we say that pause for a year or so and find alternative routes, which the national oil company is saying we have, before we arrived at this particular route, we did check out all the other possible routes that we could use, all the possible alternatives for this pipeline, and they even have evidence to that regard. It took about 5 years to come up with the idea of the Tanzania route. It took about another 5 years for this to actually be actualized and say, okay, we're moving forward with this route. And we are looking at us being held hostage by the European political elite. We are stalking, allegedly, of course, according to pro-ECOP activists, we are stalking and fueling a geopolitical fight between the West and the East, which is China.
I don't want to look at it as a struggle against China, because, like I said earlier, the biggest investor here is France. So China is really out of the question. I mean, they usually fight Chinese investment in Africa, but in the case I don't see China there. Sinopec has 8% of the stocks in the ECO. So this is a European issue and a Ugandan issue, and it's upon us to really sit down and resolve it. But back to sovereignty, I think, like Milton said, when we normally hit the wall on issues and then outsiders point fingers at us, we normally run back to the corner and claim our sovereignty, Pan-Africanism, and all that jargon. But ideally, that's a scapegoatism. That's trying to avoid the issues. The issues are so clear. If you have human rights violations, then sit down and sort it out, like Kamunyu said. I mean, we all know what's going on in Uganda. If at all you are going to look at this in business sense, what are the risks involved in investing in Uganda as a company? If Uganda was a going enterprise, would you give Uganda NRM government managers your investment of 20 years and expect any returns? Who is going to hold your money? Who is going to divest it? Who is going to make sure that there are no environmental risks involved? Because our track record shows otherwise a bad precedents. We destroyed our forests just to plant sugarcane. We have we build in wetlands. We chase away people in the name of development. And when it comes to compensating people, I think even 1 year is not enough. We all know that there were people who were displaced for the Kabale refinery project so early in 2008, 2011, around there, but up to now, 10 years later or more, Those people have never been resettled. And that's not one project that the government has undertaken. Every day there are so many incidences of land grabbing, people displacements in the media. So these people, they could be Europeans, but when they are making judgments on Uganda, they look at what do we have in our media, what's going on. Today we are living in an open world. We can no longer hide our dirt under the carpet and pretend that we are all clean. No, the cameras are all over. So in this case of Uganda, it's like, hey, you know, like when you enter a supermarket or a grocery store, there are these funny memes which say, smile, you are on camera. When you enter oil industry, you are on camera. Everybody is interested because it's a high yielding financial investment. Secondly, it has a global impact, both on environment and on the finances. And when you go back to development, it's like a golden parachute to development. We are talking big money. We are talking more than $10 billion just pushed into the economy. This is a very big investment for Uganda. But at what cost? What is the opportunity cost of this investment? What is it going to cost Ugandans to get this money? Is it going to be, you know, like you receive one, but you lose 5? So what are we taking in? What are we going to benefit from this? How are we going to benefit? If you are going to plant good seeds in a garden, at least you make sure the garden is very cleared, very well fertilized in order to get good yields. But here we are, we have good seeds. The garden is not clear, it's full of corruption, human rights abuses. We are led by a dictator. Our political future is not clear. Who is going to take care of ECO after M7? Do we know our at the end of or the future of Ugandan politics in the next 5 years? Do we know whether we will have elections in 2026? So all these things, do we even have a parliament which has capacity, and do we have monitoring institutions? Do we have public institutions which can police the government, like police each other to make sure that the oil industry is very accountable? And like Milton said, countries like Libya, like Botswana, which have benefited from oil investments, they have a lot of mechanisms, checks and balances, which ensures that this money is well utilized or well saved for future generations. Because oil is a very risky investment, both environmentally and even politically, by the way. That's why there is this jargon of saying oil curse and all that. So if we are to take that risk, are we having mitigating factors on ground to make sure mitigating, yes, like checks and balances and blocks on ground to really protect Ugandans from some of these side effects? Are we going to have inflation tomorrow? Can we control our economy today? Can we control against capital flight? Because this money might even come in Uganda in one hand, and our corrupt government officials sniff it away at offshore accounts in the next time, like the case is in Nigeria. So how will this benefit Uganda? It will leave us with environmental risks, but then we will not even have resources to mitigate those risks in case of anything, because the money will be swindled away. So most countries which harvest oil beneficially to the people, they really have strong governance institutions on ground. We don't have to have the best, but can we at least put up the basics? Can we ensure that we are accountable? Can we ensure that we are transparent? Can we even know who is going to manage the oil industry or the national? I mean, so far the laws are good, but are those laws implementable? What about the minimum wages of workers? What about the environmental risks that are pointed out in case of, say, oil spillover and all that? So do we have even, if we cannot protect Mabira Forest, can we protect Lake Victoria against oil spillage? So all these things as Ugandans really, I mean, even giving us 1 year to really think about it, I think is even not enough. Maybe it's 1 year to create awareness so that Ugandans can wake up and see what they are supposed to do. The biggest challenge is, like I said earlier, governance. As long as our governance is so shaky, our political future is not so clear, you could find that we are going to get this oil and we end up like DRC, where the oil, the resources from diamonds are arming rebels, or Al-Shabaab in Somalia. So it's not even about the current government, but if you don't have any strong leadership on the ground, you don't even know who is going to end up benefiting even from this oil, or even using it to destroy the country.
Okay, Miriam, you raised very interesting issues there, but I want to disagree with you on one front. I am looking at the fact that whereas we are saying we might be causing capital flight and scaring our investors because of whatever politics we are playing, I worry these are some of the things that are chasing our investors. These are some of the things that are causing capital flight. If we are against our own development, if we cannot support the government in ensuring the progress of ECOP, then perhaps we are shooting ourselves in the foot. How are we supposed to move forward? How are we supposed to encourage and create an atmosphere for more investment if we are not really in support of the few developmental projects coming in? Well, I'll leave it at that, Miriam, but I want to come to Milton. Milton, earlier you raised in the chat room, you said Total has been sued for abuses from the project in France, and that case is in court. The judge has refused to dismiss the case, so the financial world is also on pause, is also looking at the outcome of the case. Now, it is on the side of the EU. This is where I realize that EU grudge with Kampala regime is the Brussels feud with Total Energies, which Brussels accuses of causing with Moscow, that attacked Ukraine and provoked 8 months ago. Now, we have all the issues therein, and we are being affected by the fights that are not even Ugandan fights, you see. So we should, I think we should all support ECOP because everybody else outside is against our development.
I will not alter my position that the biggest enemy to our development is dictatorship. And investors assess risk. They read political news, they read financial news, they read statements coming from diplomats, because that's how they gauge the political relationship between the so-called donor countries and the recipient country. So obviously it's very important to them what attitude does the EU or the United States or the UK have toward the government of the day. And they are seeing a wind change in the statements coming from the countries that have supported the regime for such a long time. And the statements are changing significantly. Then the statements are not changing just out of thin air. The statements are based on observing things on the ground. And let's be serious. The last election in Uganda, it would only qualify as being called an election in an African country. Anywhere else, it would not. How do you have an election where citizens are killed before the election, during the election, and then after the election, you have this campaign? Even the West got to know what the word drone means in Uganda. It does not mean the same thing as it does in the West. So all this information is being assessed. So it means that even Total itself is re-evaluating its own position based on the statements that it sees coming from the EU, from the US, from the UK, and they also evaluate conditions on the ground in Uganda. So all these things are not just happening in a vacuum. So the investors know this, the citizens of Uganda know this as well. In fact, General Museveni himself, he's a sharp individual. You know, he's not unclever. So if he puts himself in the position of the investors, he would be coming to the same assessment. You see? So he's just acting shocked and surprised when in fact, he has been responsible for the human rights violations that are ongoing in Uganda. He was hoping they would give him a break because he knows he has had a special relationship with them for a long time. He knows why they ignore the issues of democracy in Uganda. And it's particularly because of Uganda's guarantee to the survival of the government in Somalia by deploying Ugandan soldiers there. So that has been his big selling card for a long time. And he was hoping that he could keep selling that until the oil pipeline has been completed, the oil is flowing, because then by that time, they cannot change. They cannot make an oil pipeline that has already been completed disappear like that. So he was just playing for time. But it seems like time has now caught up with him. They've drawn the line on the soil. So the only way I can see this going forward is if the dramatic fundamental change in Uganda in terms of governance, where we actually have a restoration of the Constitution of Uganda, a constitution that has originally, as it did, term limits and age limits, so that we do not really care who is in power in Uganda, so long as we know that there's a constitution that guarantees that there will be a transition, maximum in 10 years or minimum in 5 years after a president completes one term, but 2 terms maximum. They want a democratic environment. Look at Norway and how Norway has handled its oil surplus in the most excellent way. A tiny country has the biggest reserves, money that it has put aside, even bigger than China's. Norway has, as I said earlier, $1.1 trillion. I think it's now 1.2, and China's is 1.1. China is number 2 in terms of money set aside by the government of the day. And who knows the prime minister's name of Norway? How many people know that? You have to Google it, because it does not matter who the prime minister is in Norway, because we know Norway has a system. Whoever the prime minister is today, that prime minister will be gone out of office, because the constitution assures that. That is what we need in Uganda. Then we can have assurance for all these international investors to do such a massive investment as the oil industry is.
Right. Thank you, Milton, for that. Very interesting. But I would believe that a better economy is equal to a better life for its people. So when we say this is going to, we need to address our human rights issues, agreed, we need to address them. But most of these human rights issues come up usually most times because of a bad economy. We are trying to improve our economy. Now, if I could quote some Ugandan officials, they were saying this is a chance to develop and we deserve to have this opportunity for economic development, just like the West. And the argument is that the revenue that they get from selling oil will help Uganda provide better social services, better infrastructure, and even lower emissions, if you haven't thought about that. So you know that we import most of our oil via Kenya, and it has very high emissions. So once our project is in, it will become a producer of oil, and there will be small domestic refinery. So about a quarter of the oil that is produced from this project will be refined domestically and stay in Uganda and meet our needs. So the argument is that this new process will result in less emissions than the current system, but also improve our economy. Over to you, Dr. Kamunyu.
sincerely, in my own view, and from what I gather, and I have some information on what really as a result in terms of human rights. Mental issue is really a very small one. I have just confirmed the biggest issue in rights. I will insist, and I gather that we are also signatories to the joint Africa-EU strategy. And in the joint Africa-EU strategy, we commit to peace, security, democracy, prosperity, solidarity, and human dignity. And I think this is a very serious undertaking that could enable a body, a continental body that has a hand in this project, or could give a green light to begin questioning our human rights record. And so I do not think we should undermine that view, the view that, for example, we should open up, because I also gather in some way that EU is, for example, directing that there should be access, and I'm surprised to a very large extent. I did not know that, for example, civil society and journalists are not allowed to access the oil fields. Because in their resolution, they seem to reiterate and call on Uganda authorities to allow free, meaningful, unhindered access to the oil zone for civil society organizations, independent journalists, international observers, and researchers. And I find this call very shocking to me, because I thought we were upfront on that. And this shows that there's some level of opaqueness. Because if you are committing to democracy, then you must not dare be opaque. You must allow civil society to look into the business of what you're doing, and independent journalists and international observers and journalists, because you are signatory to some of these tough treaties or tough rules of engagement. And also, I also see a reiteration for a strong and ambitious directive on mandatory corporate due diligence and ambitious legally binding international instrument to cope with human rights, environment, and climate obligations, as outlined in its resolution of 10th March 2021, with recommendations to the Commission on corporate due diligence and accountability. And you can see the issue of human rights is coming in. And so let's not cover our faces. It seems strongly the opposing groups here at home and internationally, our children living in the outside countries, the citizens of Uganda, have arm twisting, not arm twisting as such. They are, let's say, arm twisting in our position here at home. Government of Uganda to score on this record. This is where I would think it is honest enough for us to see it. And there have been calls of such kind in the past to see it, ensure that our citizenship is assured in all these developments. If there is any, because I don't see why would we be opaque? It would be very, very disturbing to remove the opaqueness and then sign the check and then we proceed economically. And to me, this is where we are, because we can't undermine this problem. To undermine it is also to undermine our economics. But since we have a way out, because His Excellency has assured this is not a big issue, it will be sorted out. I do believe in him in a way that he has a way out on this. But from what I see and what I read, and what could be the contents of the resolution, the human rights issue is a big issue, and it's very detailed. I didn't know, and this section shocks me. H4, it shocks me that we've been opaque to this level, that an European Parliament is telling us now to allow free, meaningful, and unhindered access to the oil zone for civil society, independent journalists, and so if there's nothing to hide or nothing to keep outside the know of citizens, then there it can also be negotiated as an act of citizenship. I repeat this once again. The economics that we are pursuing are economics of Ugandans, to benefit Ugandans. And I will never be dishonest on that point. And so the call for human dignity, the call for democracy, self-determination is within the reach of our government, because that's a foundational promise that my government made to Ugandans and is committed to it. And so it's not too much to ask. This, to me, is a very small issue that could be addressed for our economics to proceed. And it shouldn't even come with the exchange of words or whatever, because it's something possible. Why not? Such that then the economics can also be assured so to me, the joint Africa strategy, Africa-EU strategy that we signed in 2007, I think gives them some latitude to comment on our internal business, because in this strategy, we committed to some level of interests that are mutual, so in nature, and also interests that talk of peace, security, democracy, prosperity, but more importantly, human dignity. And so mutual would mean that we respect the comments on each other's. So if there are comments or some level of unhappiness that Uganda has on this, it should also air it out, but should not undermine these very key foundational commitments on, for example, human dignity. They should never be undermined. And I think as myself, these are some of the things I find very, very important if this country is to move forward and strongly, and also have meaningful economic progress, so meaningful transactions that have a long-term bearing, that are enriched, that are supported, that are loved by all Ugandans, that are of also benefit to all Ugandans, and that there's nothing we need to hide in these transactions. To me, also on the other hand, leadership is a joint venture. I keep saying this. It's a venture between all Ugandans at every level. And so my call once again, this is not too much to deal with. Sit, agree, and remove these bottlenecks and pull our country forward. We've invested a lot in our country, our efforts in every way, as teachers, as researchers, as business people. And so we should not also, allow such simple things that we even signed or committed to uphold, to spoil our country's future.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kamunyu. Now, Miriam, you've heard from Dr. Kamunyu, you've heard from Milton, and the question still is, and especially Dr. Kamunyu brings out the issue of the joint EU-Africa strategy. And we ask ourselves, can the EU really put an end to the ECOP that has already started? Can it stop funding any new oil and gas projects in Africa and the world at large? Can it provide climate finance for loss and damage and for adaptation of mitigation? Let us think deeply about the EU-AU relationship for now. Let's think about that in line of course, the ECO.
Yeah, of course they can stop the funding. It's their money, like we said. I mean, they own the project, but back to that relationship, you know, when you enter someone in a relationship, like Kamunyu said, you can't stop them from snooping in your corner, because I mean that's what the relationship is about. But back to the sovereignty of African states. What if African countries, instead of wasting the resources they have in buying things which don't benefit us, buying convoys for their presidents, luxuries here and there, what if we put our resources to investment instead? What if we put together our resources as Africa and put them in African Development Bank to finance our infrastructure projects like ECOP instead of relying on EU? We can't claim to be sovereign states if we can't even fund our budget. They say whoever pays the piper calls the music. So when these funders come and start stepping in our plates, I mean, it's their money. And we don't have sovereignty whatsoever. It doesn't matter what reasons they are giving. Of course, they are giving valid reasons, but to the point of our sovereignty, can we really step up and make sure that we are being responsible for ourselves so that we can own our projects to a bigger extent? I think more Ugandans would be interested in ECOP if it was 60% owned by Uganda. Even then, our government would take care to ensure that the projects are well executed, because it's our money, it's our taxpayers' money, and every taxpayer would be having that responsibility to make sure that there is accountability for that funding. But like Milton said, now this is, the ECOP is like an imperial project. It's the FDI fully funded, foreign fully funded, and I think what we own is just the land and maybe guaranteeing the loans and all that, but that's not enough. If we are to really be in charge of our affairs, it's high time we save our own resources. The money we embezzle, the 20 trillion that we embezzle each year, is enough to at least buy us shares. If we owned the ECOP like 60% and maybe 30 is donor funded, then somehow, not donor, but funded by foreign corporations, then somehow we would have a bigger say on the future of the project. But I'm glad the EU resolution doesn't really talk about stopping ECOP, or doesn't mean that they don't look at the beneficial side of ECOP. The resolution is about clean up first, and then we bring the check. Like I said, it's about make sure that you have environmental mitigation factors on the ground, that you've done real good feasibility study. I saw somewhere there was an article in Daily Monitor, I think Nile Post or some other national media, which said that Uganda hasn't even done the feasibility study of ECOP. How is it going to benefit us financially? Do we know that? We could be just chasing the pipeline, the pipeline just for the sake, and we don't even have any financial benefit from that project. So if we can't do these studies before investing, EU is saying, recommending, just can you first do these small things? clean up and for 1 year at least halt it, so that you ensure that your environment is your investment is not going to the drain. So if we don't even know how ECOP is going to benefit us. If we don't, what are we chasing really? We all know there was a tendency of borrowing. Even now we are highly indebted. And most of these loans, it's rumored, were mortgaged against the oil. So the oil, ideally, even when it's still in ground, has already been eaten. If to use the Ugandan slang, it's like it's already, we are already indebted on that same oil, so that we are trying so hard to get the oil out so that we pay the debts. So how is that going to benefit Ugandans? And most of these these loans, if you follow the audits every year that are coming out from the Auditor General, we see that most of these loans are overpriced, like they are really exaggerated or due to corruption. They are very expensive, and there is largely no value for money. We are embezzling half of the money that we borrow from for investment. So all these things should concern us as citizens, because now every Ugandan is already indebted, but we don't know what we are paying for. And how much are we going to pay when we get $10 billion more from these banks to fund the oil project? We don't even have a feasibility study to know how this pipeline is going to benefit us. I would be ideally, investment. This oil is looked at when you follow the national planning, projections that are from the finance and the planning ministry. They show that the oil is kind of like a golden parachute that will usher us into the middle income, that will bring that much wanted kickstart to modernizing our economy. But are we really going to get value for money? So that should concern us.
Hello, Miriam. Okay, I think there's a freeze there.
Yeah, her
But
screen froze.
thank you.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, all right then. Thank you, Miriam. I think over the years, the government has assured us of how profitable the oil business is, but we have learned from many other African countries, particularly, but also elsewhere. We understand, and Miriam, you already hinted on this. The oil curse. Is this the beginning of the oil curse conversation? Has it just started? I mean, it's too early for us to be in this mess in regards to the oil curse. But for decades, it has been an open secret that when a country discovers a valuable natural resource, Allimadi was giving us the example of Nigeria, the example of Angola, and elsewhere, in Mozambique and very many other countries. In the event that the country sits on the bottom of the economic food chain, what follows is usually instability, instigated on it by the more powerful ones. Now, this, I feel, is the start of our pain, of our struggle in the future in regard to the oil curse. Milton.
And the oil curse, of course, is much more likely to occur in a dictatorial environment, which is the case in our beloved Uganda. The regime, obviously in the next couple of months, we will see how serious it is. I think there's some clever people who might advise the dictator and say, listen, the only way to really salvage this project is to start a transition process that leads this country to full democracy. So number one, you should indicate a date by which you will step down. And this will send a very powerful signal to the international community and to investors too. And you should support publicly the restoration of term limits on the Constitution and age limits, and then set we know when the next election is, of course, so that by that time we have a restored constitution in place and the country has the kind of election that we saw in Kenya, even with all its glitches and a little obstacles here and there. A person who was running against the establishment, even though he was part of the establishment, ended up being sworn in as the new president of the country. So Kenya has now politically matured. There was no violence, no significant violence before, during, and after the election. So the international community, which has already invested significantly in Kenya, can now say, if we want to invest in East Africa, this is the country to go to, Kenya. They've arrived. They've learned from the bloody lessons of the past, from the 2007 election, which was one of the most bloody ones. They've learned, and the international community know that Kenya has a system also. In the last election, the Supreme Court of Kenya was able to annul the results of that election, even though the establishment, the incumbent, was running. And they said, no, there were significant flaws, you did not win. Let's hold new elections. These are the kind of things that international investors want to see, that there's a system in place rather than individuals in place. If we have individuals who decide that, oh, this is what I want, this is the person I want to be in this position in the oil industry. Oh, this person needs some money for his or her individual project. We have money from oil. Give that person the money because I say so, because I make all the laws in this country. That is how you are very likely guaranteed to have an oil curse. I'm sure if you go to the Ogoni land and you ask the people of Ogoni, are you better off with oil industry in Nigeria or not? The people of Ogoni land who have seen their land destroyed, the environment destroyed. You have whole rivers or lakes rather, just of oil, where you can even light the water with a match and fire would start burning on the water. I'm sure they would say, no, our fathers and forefathers were better off without the oil. They could till the soil, they were producing the food, they were earning enough from the food to send us to school, to even save some money, and to buy manufactured resources. We don't have that now. Now we have our kids coming in containers to scoop the oil that has been spilled, to sell it, and that's how they're making their money. How could anybody prefer that to what they had before? And given the political contestations that we have in Uganda, Uganda is very likely to end up like that. Because if the people don't buy into the project, as Dr. Kamunyu actually pointed out earlier, they can sabotage, they can destroy the pipeline. And then we're going to have oil spills like we have in Ogoni. So we need to have a system where it does not matter who is the ruler of Uganda. I want to be able to forget who is the president of Uganda, just like I don't know who the prime minister of Norway is. Actually, I had to Google it, and then I found out, you see? And then I realized I'd never heard that name before. But Norway is functioning well, a democratic country with the biggest savings in the world, bigger than even the United States sovereign fund, $1.1 trillion. That's what I want Uganda to be like.
Thank you, Milton. We are on our way to try and wind up on this conversation, but I'm giving you each enough time on this particular same question. And coming to Dr. Kamunyu, for decades, it has been an open secret that when a country discovers a valuable natural resource, in the event that country sits at the bottom of the economic food chain, what follows is instability, instigated on it by the more powerful ones. And we have seen these cases in many African countries, and we continue to see them. And according to Milton, chances are high Uganda might be the same.
I'm saying that in my view, and I'm really surprised, because reading through this motion, joint motion for resolution, I realized that there's some level of opaqueness being reported, and for heaven's sake, country's business is citizens' business, and citizens can choose what to put out or not to put out, and it can't be as perfect as I'm talking about, but there must be some level of openness, at least internally. But I read that there's some level of opaqueness to this oil project, and so this is then in tandem with what in the past has been popularly called a resource curse, or what others could call oil curse, and the resource curse really points to some complex phenomenon that is caused largely by poor management or investment of oil revenues by governments of oil producing countries, and usually this is characterized by weak institutions of the state and poor governance in managing the vast revenues, and the resolution here points to that possibility, and that if there's some level of opaqueness, then we are more likely to fall into the Nigerian case. Oil, without doubt, is a very serious resource and comes with vast revenues, and these revenues should be of interest to citizens because they come to power the economy, to power their lives, and to assure the dignity that we affirm to in the joint Africa-EU strategy. And so, yes, if we don't look into the poor governance issues, specifically to how, for example, these vast resources will be managed, and of course also, to be sincere, with a record of 20 trillion per year loss in corruption, oh my, the possibility of this curse is there, as they also first put it, and we could also fall into this curse. So once again, looking at the joint motion, and I see clearly now the environmental issue is not a big deal. So the National Oil Company audits could be tick, but it seems this motion is more to do with human rights. And so, and since the oil curse points to weak institutions of the state and poor governance in the management of vast oil revenues that come with such a project, revisiting and increasing the openness, undermining the opaqueness is quite key. And on whether this should have been a call from a European Parliament is what I can possibly say is unfortunate, and of course takes us back to times where we have to begin engaging on very old terms like imperialism and neo-colonialism, and which to me, when someone is talking about citizenship and Africans are trying to be Pan-African as much as possible, it shouldn't arise. Really, we must look inside and begin to work together as Africans. And if there are hindrances to that point of working together, we should remove them. And this is where most experienced president, I think, has made an assurance that it's not a big issue. Maybe some of these small things would be removed. And like I've always, pointed out in the past, Miriam knows, I trust that the NRM came to make sure there's good governance, and also to make sure we have strong institutions on which the state can base its functions. And for us to avoid this chaos that is beginning to show its ugly head, we need to embark on that and move forward. And on the economics must be for the people. I repeat, they can't be for someone or some kind of invisible states that we do not know. The economics are for the people. The people are the ones toiling for this country. And so they must be assured of the openness, the necessary openness, and the strong institutions based on merits, and where there is proof that we will sustain this project. For me, it's of paramount importance, and it shouldn't have gone as far as even European Parliament beginning to talk about our affairs here. But I still have hope. I've insisted that the 20 trillion converted to dollars, that could be $5 billion, reported by the Independent in 2021, and the 11 trillion lost, which is about approximately $3 billion, meaning we lose between $3 and $5 billion a year. If saved, if we embarked on this and saved this money, of course, it would also mean that we are improving our stance. So we are also strengthening institutions, would be good to go, and wouldn't even be over signing these unfair agreements that almost make us look. 15% is not good enough. We should have had 50% or even 80% with this money that is lost. Why not? We could have even gone. Total would be the one with 15, and this other foreign company also maybe with 15. We would have, and maybe Tanzania 15, and the rest should have been us. And so if we can work on this corruption, in my view, this is my view, because it's unfortunate. Why should we lose 20 trillion shillings? And I don't know. I find it very strange that it is reported by the Auditor General and nothing serious is done year in, year out. And I think it's high time we did it and we undertake our own project and we call it a day. I submit.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kamunyu. Miriam, you already alluded to the oil CAS, and I want to make it even more broader. It is the natural resources CAS, really, because we have seen what has happened with many nations on the African continent. Namibia, we've seen Somalia, we've seen DRC, Mozambique, we have seen Nigeria. I mean, it has been an open secret, and we know that once there's a huge resource at play, then what happens or what follows is instability. And oftentimes this has, actually, according to Milton and Dr. Kamunyu, all this is attributed to the governance of the country. I would want us to, I don't know what your take is, but in my opinion, I would think that we have a good start. Can we support each other on this? Can we support our country to move forward? And maybe as we explore and as we exploit our resource in the oil and gas sector, then perhaps something good can come out of it. Maybe governance can improve. Maybe human rights can improve. Who knows?
Yeah, then I think that one might work. But instead of calling it oil or gas or natural resources gas, I think it's more of a leadership gas. Unless we also call human beings our natural resources, because the oil has done nothing and oil is beneficial in itself the way it is. But it's our management, our leadership, our governance, which is the problem. For instance, the example, if you look at the track record, even before oil, and you look at NRM's record of management, What project has NRM government in the last 40 years ever managed successfully? Look at the recent coffee deal, which was a real thuggery, like in the making. Look at the Umeme contracts, which President Museveni alleges he signed when he was sleeping. Look at there is a recent dam scandal, is it Isimbwa or somewhere? Look at the corruption that is so enormous that Kamunyu was talking about. So I think our case is more of a leadership case, and which is curable. I want to be really pessimistic here. I think if we have a leadership problem, we can still fix it. It's not doom for life for Ugandans, but we should take this opportunity. Like Kamunyu said, we shouldn't wait for the Europeans to call us on our failures. It's time to check ourselves. It's time to reclaim our country. It's time for us to wake up and take charge of our resources, take charge of our governance. You see, what has happened in Uganda is that the good people, or the so-called good people, have shunned the leadership roles and resorted to sitting back and watching when the country is being messed up by incompetent people. Yet we have capacity, we have people who have leadership skills, who have even the ethics and the integrity to really lead our country forward in a very rightful manner, at least which can secure our future and the future of the coming generations. The biggest challenge Uganda has today is our population is multiplying at a real fast rate. We have one of the youngest populations in the world. We have one of the fastest population growth rates in the world. And so far, we are really hitting a deadlock as far as economic development is concerned. That's why you see most Ugandan youth are ending up in some sort of work slavery in the Middle East because they don't have work back home. So if we really can't even manage the small resources we have, whether it's coffee, whether it's electricity, whether it's schools, whether it's roads, even building roads, how are we going to even secure the future of such a young generation, of such a young population that is coming after us? And this should be a concern of everybody. Like I said before, people are shunning politics and leaving them to really people who are incompetent. And when they mismanage our resources, we act surprised. Why are we surprised? Who are these people who are in power really? If you put in a torch, where are the good people like Dr. Kamunyu who are the elites in Makerere? But they are busy, making commentaries, releasing paper after paper. But nobody wants to step up and take charge and really say, look, we can do this and we can do it better than it is right now. So let's look at oil as one of those resources and such an opportunity that should give us another chance to revive our economy. But we have to do something fast before we get there. And that's what the European Union is telling us and other people who have raised concerns before. Can you try to do this? Because these things have happened before and everybody knows the end even before it comes. It's easily predictable. Everybody knows if you get a huge resources and hands it over to incompetent government, even if it was a company, if the management is very incompetent, what do you expect? Things will actually get more worse than it is right now, because we have seen even the smaller resources. So far, the oil industry has generated some income. It's not the ECOP is the only income that is going to come from the oil. We have sharing contracts, licensing capital coming from. So that we've already had a fund and it's been mismanaged. So we have precedents, and those should direct us to what we are doing wrong so that we can correct things before they grow much worse. And when it comes to the environment, some of the effects are not reversible. So we should take it very seriously. Africa, most people think that Africa is not facing the global warming, but we see floods in Bududa, we see floods in Kasese, people are dying. We see the seasons are changing. We've wasted all our forests, like we've cleared 80% of our forest due to fuel shortage and other things, but yet we can't even ensure power, electricity is mismanaged. I mean, we really have a lot of things we can fix beyond oil, even without oil, that can make our nation a better economy, our national economy much better and more productive. But we need the right people in the right places. We need the right institutions. And this should be a concern of all of us, because even these people who are mismanaging people, I mean, you can steal money in Uganda, but if the country is in chaos or everybody is poor, even the roads are bad, how are you going to enjoy that money? So I think it's a kind of selfishness to store government resources without considering given what is going to happen after that. And all of us should really, really be concerned. Like Milton said, we need a clear political future, about a clear picture about the future of Uganda, and that will assure the investors and everybody that the economy is predictable and it's a good investment for you to come in, instead of throwing money where you don't know where the future will be. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I am going to take a minute from each of you to give us your conclusive remarks. I'll start with you, Dr. Kamunyu. I'll start with you. Your concluding remarks on this particular show.
Thank you very much. First of all, for inviting me here to share my views. I continue to believe that to be Pan-African is to assure the African people the dignity that they deserve, and more so in the 21st century. And once that dignity has been assured, the oil, gas, and minerals that we have will also come to enrich our lives together. And for countries that are rich in gas and minerals that have also failed to reach their full potential, as a result of that wealth, they are usually characterized by authoritarianism, more prone to conflict, and less economically stable. And research shows that they are more unstable when compared to countries without such resources. And also, to avert this, there is a need for an open policy on extractives, to do so in the eyes of citizens without anything to hide, because that's where the cash comes from, and to avoid the negative consequences, and then also maximize on the benefits. So in my view, this joint motion should not worry us, because we have the know-how. We know what to do. These human rights are enshrined in everything that we believe in, including the songs we often sing of Pan-Africanism, to assure ourselves of dignity and joint benefits out of what we possess together. What are long called the commons should not be something we worry about. It should be a point of meeting, a point of convergence, such that we can assure ourselves and get out of these buzzwords, Pan-Africanism and all that, and club business, and begin to secure the dignity of the African people. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kamunyu. Milton, in a minute.
The joint resolution by the European Parliament gives Ugandans another chance. So those who've been fighting for democracy, the need to build institutions rather than be subjected to individual rule or autocratic rule, should use this as a bargaining chip. Demand the restoration of the Constitution with presidential term limits, with the age limits, and all the guarantees that, number one, supposedly motivated the fight to remove Milton Obote's government in the first place. It was allegedly to restore democracy in Uganda. And that democracy was supposed to be enshrined in the constitution that was then debated nationally and created with presidential term limits and age limits. That constitution was eviscerated by the dictatorship. We must restore that constitution so that Ugandans will not worry, whoever is in power, whoever is the president of the day, that she and hopefully hopefully she, because there's been too many he's, would be subjected to term limits. We would not have to worry about her or his whim. That's what we need to use this as a bargaining chip to achieve in Uganda. Otherwise, the resources of Africa has been used and is still being used to make other countries wealthy. We can't afford that. And the way this contract is written, as Miriam has pointed out consistently, will benefit others more than it benefits the country holding the resources. We need to have more Botswana-type management of the state in African countries. Then we'll be able to use our resources to create wealth and prosperity in Africa, not outside Africa. And then when you have all these crises of poverty mitigated, because now we're using our resources, then we can seriously start discussing African unity. At the end of the day, all other regions are moving toward unity, even the Europeans with the EU. Once we have that, a United States of Africa, we will come to the table as equals. If you want my resources, you're going to pay the price that I said, not you said. How can you determine the price you want to buy my resources for? They only do that because we are weak, divided. But once we have a United States of Africa, then we'll be the ones sending foreign aid, official foreign aid, to the EU countries, to the United States, and to everybody else. It may not happen in our lifetime, but we need to lay the foundation so that the next future generation will finally enjoy the resources of Africa. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Milton. Miriam, you also have a minute and we close the show.
Yeah, to add on what everyone has said, I think we should look at this as an opportunity to have this discussion about oil. I recently was encouraged by the national discussion about the coffee industry. Can we also engage in this discussion about our resources like we did with the coffee? Can everyone really be concerned about the stake and the future of the economy of Uganda so that we really have, we know how to hold our leaders accountable from the grassroots to the president. And also leaders should know that we are aware of what they are doing and they are also accountable to us. As we near our celebration of our independence, I mean, it's time to take stock and see how far have we come, what have we done? And in the Ugandan case, it's like, it's mostly what have we done wrong that we can still correct and make sure that we achieve the aspirations of our founding fathers, of people who struggled for the independence of Uganda so that the future generations can live in peace and prosperity. We can still make it if we really work hard. We don't have to give up. And the current leaders should also know that they are not going to stay forever, and one day they're gonna go. But what are they leaving behind? Are they going to leave destruction in their wake? what type of legacy are they leaving for us? And if it's a destructive kind of or negative Uganda they are leaving behind, it's going to affect them and their next generations also. So this should be a national cause, and I want to see more Ugandans really participating in these discussion about our environment, our oil resources, our economy, and our future investments, whether it's in coffee, whether it's in education, and every other sector. And I wish all of you a nice weekend, Lynn, Dr. Kamunyu, and Milton. Have a lovely
Thank you.
weekend. Yes.
Thank you. Likewise to everybody. Thank you.